Hey guys, Steph here. As you may or may not know, I have been working towards certification as a nutritional therapist. And as part of that class, I wanted to make this video. This is going to be a quick video about fermenting. It's something I get asked about a lot. It's something I'm passionate about. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about sauerkraut. Making sauerkraut is how I got my feet wet with fermenting. I think it's easy and it's delicious. Okay, so what is fermenting? Fermenting is basically taking fresh vegetables, chopping them up, mixing them with salt and or water, packing them tightly into a jar or any other type of fermentation vessel that you have, and letting it sit. And the beauty of it is the bacteria that's found naturally on the vegetables and fruits. You can also ferment fruits. The bacteria that's there naturally does the fermentation process for us. And so it happens in stages. There are about 3 days where the salt is important, because the salt is going to inhibit any bacteria that would cause putrefaction or rotting of the food. And then after those 3 days, the bacteria begin to produce a lot of lactic acid. So that's why you hear it referred to as lacto-fermenting pretty often. And so once that kicks in, the environment is too acidic for any bacteria that's not desirable to begin to proliferate. And so from there on out, it's just smooth sailing. You just leave it on your counter and you keep an eye on it for about 4 weeks. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the benefits of fermentation. I guess the most obvious benefit would be preservation. Fermentation is a great way to be able to preserve foods. And it's interesting, there's evidence of fermentation that goes back 8,000 years ago. And so this is something that's been with humans for a long time. And fermenting fresh foods, like fruits and vegetables, along with drying and salting foods, were really solidifying factors in man's ability to become cultivators. So another exciting benefit of lacto-fermenting is our food is more nutritious for us. There's an increase in certain vitamins and minerals that happens with the fermentation process. Sauerkraut is actually well known for being taken with sailors on ships because it was so rich in vitamin C, and it lasted longer than limes, as they were known to use also. So that's a little interesting side note. But the bacteria that we mentioned, the lactic acid producing bacteria that's found naturally on our vegetables and our fruits, when those proliferate, the lactic acid bacteria are probiotics for us. There's something that's science is discovering has been missing from our diet for quite a while now. Not many people get sources of really good bacteria, really healthful bacteria. So we have our own microbiome, it's called. So our own colony of bacteria living in our intestinal system. And a fermented food is a great way to feed that, to help populate it. And along with those extra nutrients that we're eating, the cabbage, for example, is a great source of what's called a prebiotic. A prebiotic is a food that feeds our own colony of bacteria. So we're getting the prebiotic and the probiotic, and it makes sense, right? We eat a fermented food for both of those things. We nourish our own bacteria with the food, and we also help to populate our own bacteria. So you may be surprised to know that the acidic nature of fermented foods is another reason that they're so great for us. So traditionally, ferments have been eaten as a condiment, so along with your main course meal, whether it's in a fermented fruit, which make great chutneys, or a fermented vegetable like a sauerkraut. The acidic nature helps us to digest the other food that we're eating. Our stomachs actually secrete hydrochloric acid, which serves several important purposes, but mostly the breaking down of our food and making the nutrients contained in the food available to us. So eating something acidic along with a meal is only going to help that process. Fermented foods are also a rich source of enzymes which lend themselves to the digestion process as well. Next, I'm going to show you how I make sauerkraut. There are a lot of great tools available, lots of different fermenting vessels, beautiful crocks, vintage crocks. I have a few of them. I honestly have never used them for fermenting because my go-to has just always worked well for me. I've never had a problem with just a regular old mason jar and a plastic lid. It really is inexpensive and easy, and you can get as high-tech with it as you want, but you don't have to. And the same goes for ingredients. You can add in almost anything you can think of. I like to add sometimes shredded carrots and ginger to my sauerkraut. There's just tons of ideas. Anything you can think of is valid. So the other thing I wanted to mention was salt. You can use any salt, but I feel like you're sort of doing yourself a disservice if you just use regular table salt. You want a salt that's not white. When your salt is white, it's a pretty good indicator that it has been stripped of all of its minerals, they've been sold off, and they're selling you the result, which is just the salt with none of the minerals. And so anytime you have the opportunity to get some more nutrition in your diet, I think it's a great thing. This is my favorite salt. It's real salt. It's from Montana, I believe, or Utah. It works great for fermenting. I don't know if you can see it, but it's beautiful. There are lots of different flecks of different colors, and that would indicate minerals. And I really like it. Another thing that you're going to need is some sort of way to keep your cabbage below the brine, which we'll get to in a second, but I just wanted to show you these. These are called pickle pebbles. They're just nice weights that you can put on top, and they sort of help to hold everything below the liquid. Everything below the liquid is considered anaerobic, which means no oxygen. Anything above the liquid would be considered aerobic. So the surface of the ferment can be aerobic, but anything below is anaerobic. So there are different types of tops. Some people use airlocks. You can get those at your local brew store, but they're not necessary at all. It works just fine. For thousands of years, people were fermenting without airlocks. They were just using gravity. So all you want to do is chop up your cabbage. If you have a shredder or a food processor, you can do that too. I honestly just kind of like to hack it up quickly and get it over with. These are cabbages that I got at my local farmer's market. The farm wasn't certified organic, but I did ask the farmer if they use chemicals, and farmers love to talk about their business, their pride, and they have no problem telling you what they do or don't do. So this particular farmer said, you know, even though he's not certified organic, he doesn't use chemicals. All I did was give these a quick rinse and they're good to go. So I'm just going to chop them up into shredded pieces. Okay, so I have all of the cabbage chopped up. I just do it into fine, small pieces. I'm not too picky. And you may have noticed I had 2 cabbage heads. This recipe that I'm using actually calls for 1, but mine were puny. So I'm going to count that as 1 medium-sized cabbage. And the next thing you want to do is just add 2 tablespoons of salt. And I honestly just eyeball it. So that would be 1, 2. And you can go about this a couple ways. You can just sort of toss it around and do what I like to do, which is the lazy way, and you just let it sit and that salt will draw out a lot of the liquid. Sauerkraut is self-brining, so we're drawing the water out of the cabbage to make our brine. So you can let it sit and just come back to it and check on it. You'll be amazed at how much water comes out. Or you can do it the good old-fashioned way right away and get yourself a pounder. This is not necessary, but I've found it's handy. This is not even a proper sauerkraut pounder. It's just something I picked up at Goodwill, but it happens to work pretty well. So and you just want to go until it's really juicy. And once you start to see a lot of liquid, then you know you've done your job. All right, so we have our cabbage pounded. We mixed our cabbage with the salt and we pounded it. And now the next step is to just pack it into this jar, and it must smell really good because my cat really is interested. Anyway, so it gets kind of messy, but we don't worry about that. We just pack it in, and it might look like you have a lot, but once you start packing it into the jar, it gets very compact. I use wide mouth jars for obvious reasons. I can fit my fist in there to pound it. My sauerkraut pounder that I bought is a little too wide to fit into the jar, but if you have one of those, you can definitely use that as well. And so you're just pushing everything below the brine. So we haven't made any brine. This is all just water that's come out of the cabbage. If you have a batch of cabbage that you've pounded and you're packing it in your jar and it just doesn't seem like there's enough brine to submerge all the cabbage beneath it, you can definitely make some extra brine. The ratio for that, you want it to be a 2.5% brine. And so you would take a quart of filtered water. I like to use spring water if I can. But the important part is that it's filtered to at least take out the chlorine. So a quart of that, and you mix in a tablespoon and a half of, again, unrefined sea salt. You want the minerals intact, and you want to make sure they haven't added dextrose or anti-caking agents to it, because that won't be good for your ferment. So I'm just going to keep doing this until we're full. And this is looking pretty good. You want to make sure that you're below the shoulder of the jar. you want to leave enough headspace because these things get really active the first couple days, and they do bubble a lot. It's kind of fun to watch. They eventually stop, but for the first, I don't know, 3 to 5 days, they're very active. And so you just want to make sure that there's enough room for it to bubble without it bubbling over. Because even if you have an airtight lid on it, it can find a way out. Okay, so that looks good to me. You may have noticed before I chopped up my cabbage, I saved a leaf. You want to pick a nice sturdy one. And this comes in handy because you can use it as a way to keep the pieces down. You don't want anything floating because that is potential for mold growth. Like I said before, everything that's below the surface is obviously not touching the oxygen that's in there. Anything above the surface is definitely going to come into contact with oxygen, and we just want to stop that from happening. So you can go ahead and take your leaf, and you can do all kinds of things with this. You can cut carrot planks. Those work really well because you can bend them and use the tension of the carrot. Those work great. Just stick them down. You could use an apple slice if you are making an apple sauerkraut. That's really good if you do apples and onions. That's a great combination. And so even with your leaf that you're putting in, you do want to make sure that is even below the surface because you don't want that to mold either. And so it takes some finagling sometimes, but you just want to tuck it. It just gives it a nice solid surface. And if during your fermentation process, if you've noticed anything that's come to the surface, it's okay to open it up and scrape that off before it does have the potential to mold. That's okay to do. All right. So that looks nice. It looks beautiful. We've got everything below the brine. A couple little things popping up here and there. I don't know if you can tell from the camera angle, but it is definitely all submerged. And what I'm going to do, just to make sure it stays that way, is use my pickle pebbles. These are great. They're made in the US, which is a concern for a lot of people, particularly glass that's made in China. Lead contamination is a concern. And that definitely goes for your crockware. If you are going to be using some sort of fermenting vessel other than a jar, you really want to make sure that it is lead free. If you buy a nice one and they tell you it's lead free, that's great. Otherwise, if it's a vintage one, you can buy a lead testing kit. They're really inexpensive. They have them at Home Depot, any sort of home improvement store. So that looks good. Mine is actually pretty high. I normally would prefer it to be below the shoulder space, but what I'm gonna do is just pour some of the brine out, and I think I'll be good. And those two tiny cabbages, I thought they would fill up 1 jar for sure, but I have some left over, so I'll get 2 jars of sauerkraut. And then we just seal it up and it's ready to sit. And so we're gonna leave that out room temperature for 4 weeks. There's a lot of varying opinions out there about how long to leave your ferment out before you move it to cold storage, but pretty accurate testing has shown that the lactic acid bacteria is at its highest at about 4 weeks, and that's what you want. You want those bacteria because they're gonna be a great source of probiotics for you. And then when it's done, after you've reached your 4-week mark, you just go ahead and pop it in the fridge. And it keeps indefinitely as long as it looks good. You can enjoy it. It doesn't last that long in our house. I just wanted to mention one other thing too. There's a lot of confusion with the term lacto-fermented. A lot of people assume that it means that there has been whey used in the fermentation process, and that's not the case. Lacto just refers to the lactic acid bacteria. The confusion is for a couple reasons. The obvious one being it sounds similar, and they think of dairy and they automatically think lactose. And the other reason is because you can use whey in a ferment. It's absolutely okay to do. You don't have to. I've done it both ways. I like to use whey from our milk we get from our farm. I make a fermented dairy product called kefir or kefir, depending on where you're from. And I strain it. So you take that or when you get yogurt, it's the liquid on the top. That's what whey is. And so my kefir, I strain it, and the whey that has dripped out, you can use that to ferment as well. So there are different recipes, and that's perfectly okay to do, but it definitely does not mean lacto-fermented is not an indication of dairy used at all. And an interesting side note is that whey has negligible amounts of lactose. So if someone is lactose intolerant or sensitive to it, they still may be able to tolerate a cultured product that was made with whey. So just something to consider. What you want to do now, I mentioned before, you're going to let this sit out on your countertop for about 4 weeks. But one thing that's important to do in the first few days, I would say week for sure, is every day you're going to want to go grab your ferment, and it's called burping. You're going to want to burp your ferment. So you're just going to gently twist the cover, loosen it a little bit, and you're going to hear a lot of gas escape, a lot of carbon dioxide escape. And so you're going to want to do that. Just let it all out. When it stops hissing, just tighten the lid again. And you want to do that every day until you don't hear it anymore. That will stop eventually. And that's not an indication that it's done. That's just an indication that the first phase of fermentation is done. So it's something that's important to do because, especially if you're in an airtight container like this, it's going to build up a lot of pressure and you don't want to have an explosion happen. Thanks for watching. I hope this video was helpful. I hope maybe it encourages you to get your own feet wet with fermenting, and hopefully it demystified the process a little bit for you. It's such a wonderful traditional practice to have in your home with so many benefits. Thanks.